Hi, you're listening to the Technology for Mindfulness podcast, episode 94, hosted by me, Robert Plotkin. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Brother Dave Kenneally, a former sergeant in the U.S. Marine Corps and former Buddhist monk. Dave is a certified teacher of the Search Inside Yourself program and an ordained member of the Order of Interbeing. You can find out more about Dave Kenneally at davekenneally.com. That's DaveKenneally.com. I'm extremely pleased to welcome Dave Kenneally to the Technology for Mindfulness podcast. In the upcoming interview you're about to hear with Brother Dave Kenneally, you're going to hear him point out one of the most common misconceptions about mindfulness meditation, which is that it's about trying to stop yourself from thinking, or stop yourself from feeling, or stop yourself from having any of a number of other experiences. I think it's worthwhile me just repeating that here. Normally I give some other kind of a tip up front, but I think that point that he makes is so critical and such a common misunderstanding, because it stops so many people from trying meditation, and it causes so many people to give up on meditation because of that misconception about what mindfulness meditation is. In mindfulness meditation, we don't try to stop thoughts from happening, or that isn't the intention of mindfulness meditation, to try to stop thoughts. Instead, one of the aspects of the practice, a critical aspect, is to become aware of thoughts that inevitably will arise in your mind, and then to become aware of feelings, to become aware of bodily sensations, to become aware of all aspects of experience, not to try to stop them from happening. And if you're maybe new to mindfulness meditation or haven't done it before, and you're thinking, well, then why would I engage in mindfulness meditation if the point isn't to stop this flood of thoughts I have, that often take over? Or you might say, well, look, I know I have thoughts all the time. I already am aware of that. I know that I have thoughts. What's the point of mindfulness meditation? Well, the fact that you know that you have thoughts doesn't necessarily mean that you are aware of them or practicing observing or noticing those thoughts in the moment while they're happening, rather than merely having them, rather than merely being caught up in them or carried along by those thoughts. And if that distinction doesn't make sense to you, maybe because you haven't had the experience yet of trying out some mindfulness meditation in which you work on stepping back from your thoughts, not merely having those thoughts, which we all do. We all have thoughts, but also gaining an awareness of them from a distance, from the standpoint of an observer of those thoughts, and not being wrapped up, identified with, kind of enmeshed with those thoughts. Yes, we all know we have thoughts. We all have thoughts. We all have many thoughts. But having those thoughts is not the same necessarily as being aware of them from a distance and without judgment and without identifying with them, and so on. In fact, it's possible to go many years or a lifetime having thoughts all the time without being aware of them in the way that mindfulness meditation practices, or attempts to practice and learn how to gain that distanced, focused, non-judgmental, non-identifying awareness. So I hope that's helpful. And I also hope, as we say in the interview, that if you find yourself practicing mindfulness meditation and that you find yourself continuing to have a flood of thoughts, that you don't give up and conclude that you're therefore somehow failing at meditation. Having thoughts is just a normal part of life for everyone. And no one who has thoughts is failing at meditation, mindfulness meditation, because in fact, the practice is to become aware of the thoughts, not to try to stop them. So you're going to hear so many other great insights from Dave Kenneally. I just thought that one was worth repeating here because it's so important. And hope you enjoy the interview with Brother Dave Kenneally. Hi, Dave, and welcome to the Technology for Mindfulness podcast.
Hi, Robert. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here. I'm really looking forward to talking to you about your mindfulness teaching and your background and unique approach. And I thought people would be really interested to know a little bit about your own story and how you got started with mindfulness.
Oh, wow. I guess it really depends on your definition of mindfulness, right? Because as a very young man, I was in the military. Mm-hmm. And so during those years, I was in the Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. And I got started in my attention training.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
A lot of concentration practice.
Yes.
But my definition of mindfulness is paying attention with love. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I draw a really hard line there. I'm grateful that I got that concentration training. I got introduced to things like being able to follow my breathing, to take aim with a rifle. Being aware of the body and the moment to that degree. That was helpful, but it wasn't until much later into my late 20s that it was yoga was the first one. I got out of the military and I was looking for really strong exercise. Chasing pretty girls into yoga classes. I was a young wild man from the Bronx now still. And so I started practicing yoga, and of course, right, it was exercising me, but it also was calming me down. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize that I had begun meditating until a few years in, when an instructor kind of tapped me on the shoulder and was like, "Hey, Dave, can I talk to you after class?" She was so sweet. And she said, Are you just exercising?
Yeah.
Nobody had asked me that. Most of the classes that I had been to had been pretty light on the philosophy. And she sat me down and just explained it very plainly. Like, this is a 5,000-year-old practice in creating manageable suffering to develop through repetition, to develop skill, to lean into it. And to find asana, comfortable seat, to find peace even inside of shaking and rapid breathing and balancing on one foot. And she blew my mind. And I was in a lot of suffering at that time. This was in the early, 2001. So I had been in New York for 9/11. I had just gone through a very intense year, not that different from the year we just had as a planet. But I had it in New York City. We had our own sort of crisis that touched everyone.
Sure. Yeah.
I was in a lot of suffering. I had lost some people that day. And so I was ready to hear that.
Very fortunate.
Ooh, right. The gift of meeting the Dharma, as traditional Buddhism would say, right? What a miracle. What a miracle.
Yeah.
So I just dove in, and the next thing I knew, my whole life was different. Like I left my career. I became a massage therapist so that I could be a better yogi. What I cared about was practicing yoga. And that's when I started reading things like Jon Kabat-Zinn. And that's when mindfulness started to trickle in. And at some point during those yoga years, because I ultimately became a yoga instructor and a yoga therapist, and I taught yoga teachers how to mindfully help people in life. I got into the yoga. Right? I'm a yogi. But at some point I met my root teacher now, my Vietnamese Zen master, Thich Nhat Hanh.
Yes.
I was just past one of his books one time, and it was a very simple one on walking meditation. It was almost a book of poetry more than an academic text. And I fell in love. I like saying it that way. He was saying things that I could hear,
yes,
in a way that I could hear them. Not necessarily anything strikingly different than what John Kabat-Zinn had said, or than any other teacher, Jack Kornfield, and that, than American teachers. But there was just something about it. How direct he was.
Yes.
How savage.
Yeah.
Like to say like paradise is now or never. Without any irony or any softening.
Right.
For a guy that had been military trained, for like tough kid from the Bronx, that resonated.
Yeah.
I was pretty prepared to absorb that.
Wow. It seems like, you had a few people who hit you at the right time. It's interesting with yoga, not all yoga teachers teach what you call the philosophical or meditative aspect of yoga. Many of them do teach it just as exercise. But you had someone who was able to bring a deeper level of it to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to how we started, drawing the distinction between concentration and mindfulness.
Right.
I think there are a lot of people out there that are practicing yoga as a raw concentration practice.
Yeah.
And there are benefits to that. We know neuroanatomically, right? The simple act of concentration connects my prefrontal cortex to my amygdala. Increases the communication between the thinking brain and the fearing brain.
Right.
So, they are changing their lives. Is why, as I watched over the last 30 years, yoga sort of become what it is today in the United States, I don't really bemoan it. And I'm not anti mindfulness, because raw concentration does help people. It's a great place to start.
That's it, right.
And I think eventually, as was the case with me, if you do it enough, if you're leaning into it enough, you're going to partially discover yourself that there's something more to it. And if you're lucky, and if people like you and I keep doing stuff like this, you'll meet a teacher, or you'll meet the teachings.
Yeah. Let me ask you, you talked about the attitude of love being an essential part of mindfulness. It's another thing that in the maybe current version of mindfulness that's widespread now, it's not emphasized by many people. I think about in terms of Western teachers. Sharon Salzberg certainly infuses her teachings with that love and gentleness and self-compassion, but many don't, and teach it maybe as more than concentration, but still don't have that element of love to it. Can you talk a bit about that, where it fit in maybe in your own development and in your own teaching now?
Sure, Robert. Again, like Thich Nhat Hanh is the kind of teacher that he sort of likes to teach like this. It's very Zen.
Yes.
He doesn't mince words. And one of the ways that he teaches us is through what he calls gathas, or poems for practice. G-A-T-H-A, gatha. And it comes from ancient Chinese Zen teaching. And there are a bunch of them that you have to memorize, and they're connected to each action. So there's one for, drinking a glass of water. There's one for turning on the light switch. And they're these beautiful poems that are designed to bring you back into a moment of mindfulness, a moment of loving awareness.
Yes.
And one of them that Thai, as we call Thich Nhat Hanh, which just means teacher in Vietnamese. One of them that Thai wrote is 3 words: understanding is love. And when I first heard that, I was like, how could that be possible? But he's very clear. Like he says very literally, those two words are synonyms. They mean exactly the same thing. So I've been thinking about that for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think it's true, or perhaps a better way to say it, a more meaningful way to say it, is in my experience, that is proving to be true. In my practice, the more capacity I have to understand myself, the other people involved, the circumstances, the more of that data that I have, and the more of it that I'm holding, because understanding is something different than knowledge, right? Understanding is both. It's knowledge and being able to connect the dots. Having then wise contemplation with that knowledge.
Yes.
And so it requires work.
Yeah.
And then in the Buddhist definition of love, traditionally it's broken down into 4 sort of infinite abodes, right? The one way to think about it is love is a table, and it has 4 legs. And the 4 legs are equanimity, kindness, joy, and compassion. And so even that word then becomes 4 different practices, right? Those are practices in Buddhist parlance. And the teachings are very clear. Like there's 20 different ways to cultivate joy. There's 20 different ways to cultivate equanimity. There are things to do, things to train. You know, machines along the wall in the gym, right up on mind and heart. And so once I saw it all laid out that way in the classical sense, for me, it just became, another training, whether it was military training or yoga training. I was like, oh, okay. Ashtanga yoga is what, 56 postures? One of the ways to think about breathing is the 16 practices for the full awareness of breathing, right? It's very codified. And so in the beginning, that's what I did. I just kind of dove in and took up the training. And tried very deliberately to expand my capacity to be kind, to expand my capacity to experience a moment of compassion. And I saw how the two were supporting each other, love and understanding, right? The more I was able to love, meaning kind and equanimous, etc. Right? The more I was able to understand myself. Because I was looking at myself mindfully, right? Paying attention in a loving way, in a non-judgmental, curious, accepting way. And inside of that effortfully cultivated perspective was a lot more space. It was a lot more space than the seemingly easier, more habitual reactive perspective. That had almost no space, right? That was telling me every day, you have to do this now. This is who you are. This is what you raise your voice when you are angry.
Yeah, you should.
Right. Right? Confirmation bias, right? I tell myself something and then I agree. And so that's what I'm speaking to, Robert, when I say, my definition of mindfulness is paying attention with love. My definition of mindfulness is paying attention, is concentrating, but with a cultivated perspective of love and kindness and joy and compassion and equanimity.
No, there's a lot there. I mean, you talk about, obviously a lifetime there. It's a very different way of seeing and experiencing love than that I was brought up with. You mentioned the Bronx. I grew up in Brooklyn, so we weren't that far away. I did it.
You don't like this guy.
This idea that love is either just like, I don't know, some broad feeling or idea that you have about mostly another person, not so much yourself. And what you've just been talking about, I know it applies to your feelings towards other people. You've been talking primarily about attitudes towards yourself, your own feelings, your own thoughts and attitudes, and cultivating it from that direction. And you also mentioned, moments of compassion, and talking about it as something that arises in the moment rather than just an idea that I love someone or I love myself. Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, I find it encouraging, because what I find encouraging is the idea that there are specific practices that you can engage in, because otherwise I find it can be demotivating to feel like, oh, I'd like to be more compassionate. Well, that's a tall order. How do I just go ahead to, go about doing that, knowing that there are specific things I can practice kind of moment to moment on a small scale is very motivating.
This is one of the gifts of Zen practice, specifically in the smorgasbord of mindfulness now.
Yeah.
One of the things that the Zen tradition has to offer is this emphasis on practice all the time. One of the ways I like to share with my students is, like, if you wanted to be physically healthy, like, would you think it was sufficient to spend 20 minutes a day at the gym?
Yeah.
And then the other 23 hours of the day, McDonald's and cell phones and, and they're all like, yeah, obviously not, right? I have to make healthy choices all day. Mindfulness practice, Zen practice is exactly the same. I go to the cushion the way I go to the gym. I maintain a dedicated practice. And that's great at isolating certain things, right? I can spend 30 minutes on a cushion doing metta loving kindness meditation. Right?
Sure.
Actually flex and strengthen my capacity to be kind, right? To be compassionate. That exercise is there, and it's done well, violently, and with a relatively still body. But if I want to be a mindful person all the time, right? If I want to be meeting my reality with an energy of love, with acceptance and recognition before judgment. If I want to be investigating because the moment or my own experiences or the words of another person from a place of a desire for truth and an ability to be of service and to help the situation, instead of trying to be right or trying to shame or whatever, self-promote, if I want to be that guy or that woman all day, then that 20 minutes is nowhere near enough.
Right.
And so, yes, I too am grateful that there are practices that, like the traditional gata for drinking a sip of water is poem for it goes like this. This glass of water in my two hands, mindfulness held uprightly. My mind and body dwell in the here and in the now. And then you take a sip. And it's nice, as I've done, I spent about 6 or 7 years living in monasteries and practice centers, and I became a monk. Like, I did the whole shave my wear the long brown robe thing, and that was because I really wanted to train. Like, I wanted to be doing that kind of stuff all day. And I needed a lot of support, right, in order to do that. A lot of good conditions. But ultimately, I came back. I'm wearing this brown jacket now. This is what lay ordained disciples of the Zen master Thich Hanh wear. This means I'm in the Order of Interbeing, like a member of his school. And so I wore it today just because I was like, I'm kind of on Robert's podcast as a Zen teacher. I might as well look like what I am. I like to wear it when I teach.
Of course.
But ultimately, once I spent all that time in the gym, I realized, like, for some people, being in the gym for the rest of their lives is the thing. They become that kind of personal trainer. And for others, that doesn't work, right? And when I was honest, when I looked at sort of what was left of my personality, like the parts of myself that just weren't going to change no matter how much time I spent bowing and shaking my head, right? I was still going to be this guy. And this guy was pretty confident that he'd be happier and meaning more effective at helping, right? Because that's what I care about the most.
Yeah.
Out here,
Yeah.
being able to mix and mingle and meet more people and do things like this more easily.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And as you said, be of service. So talking about that, I want to let people know, you know, what maybe some of your own experience has been over this last challenging year, what you found your students dealing with. I mean, we all know what we've all been dealing with generally, but is there anything you can share about, you know, how you've been able to bring your own mindfulness practices to bear on this extremely challenging time, still ongoing? I mean, I'm sure you're doing the same. I'm talking with people about seeing some sort of light at the end of the tunnel, but it's been a long tunnel, and we know that it's not gonna, you know, nothing's gonna change on a dime and like overnight change radically, and we don't know what to expect or predict, and the situation will continue to change, right? So I wonder if, is anything that comes to the top of your mind to share about this last year?
Wow. Fun to be asked that on a mindfulness and technology podcast.
Yeah.
Because like so many people, right? I had to like shift into fifth gear. Like, you know, I was like the guy running the marathon off the couch. I have not traditionally been, I'm not a Luddite, but I was not like an IT guy either.
Yeah.
I pretty quickly realized like, oh, well, you know, my regular Sunday teaching used to be an in-person group of about 25 people,
yeah,
you know, in a wellness studio by the beach. Like that's how I had things structured. And I didn't really have any desire to do it this way. I'll be honest, I'm still in mourning about that. Like, I miss that. Like that was a huge part of my life.
Yeah.
For years and years and years, like sitting with people in person at least once a week and practicing mindfulness together and talking about helping each other. And so, yeah, right out of the gate, I want to start there and say like, it's so painful.
Yeah.
When I realized how much I was hurting, at the beginning of this time, I was in pretty heavy quarantine. I was living in a guest quarter in a friend's house. So I had access to their family, which I was so blessed. Walk down the stairs out of my little apartment and play with children and interact with another human being. Like I was very lucky.
Yes.
But I had a niece who had just been born, and I wanted to go visit her eventually. And I didn't know very much about COVID-19, and you know, I'm not a medical doctor, and I was like, man, I want to be as safe as I possibly can be. Like this little creature is still forming her immune system, you know? And so I basically spent like, other than an hour down in the house to say hi, like 23 hours a day alone for months. You know, once a day I would go for a walk and get some food. But most, you know, I basically slipped back into like almost a monastic life. For months at the beginning of this. And I guess that, because the question I want to answer, the question I'm imagining somebody listening would have is, well, what were you practicing? Like, what were you doing? Like, what does it mean to them to say, like, I went into monastic mode? And what I mean is that, you know, while I was doing all the things you do to get online, like I hired a wonderful YouTube coach, a man named Brighton West. Look him up. Incredible. A mindfulness practitioner who helps people get online.
Great.
Talk, you know, took me step by step through everything from how to like start my YouTube channel to how to make sure that the eye line was here, you know, like all the stuff I didn't know. And so, you know, that became my work, right? I teach on Instagram. I have a Zoom Sangha now on Sundays. I do workshops once a month that are a couple hours long via Zoom, where I take people through hours of practice. But while I was sort of learning how to do all that and
Yes.
ramping that up, I was going through this incredibly painful, emotional, isolating time, like so many.
Yes.
And the thing that struck me about it the most was that it didn't really make sense to spend a lot of time thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because even now, as you pointed out, Robert, like a year plus later, we're still sort of figuring things out, and
Yes.
new information is still coming in, and we're smart to not entirely rely on the accuracy of our data streams.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's this, very artistic melange of data.
Yeah.
Sort of fixing like flowers on the table and like, okay, that's how I'm going to look at it today. I try to hold it that lightly. It's perishable, Yesterday's idea withers and dies.
Yes.
And I realized that pretty quickly. And so what I focused on was the feelings. Feelings, because they were very, very real and pretty consistent. Like I was in pain, I was sad, I was lonely, I was afraid, I was, my mother's 75 years old. I was like every day, like, ooh, this is very real.
Yeah.
And what I did was, while having my regular work day, I took advantage of my solitude. And I gave myself permission. I took up the practice of just sitting with my feelings whenever they came up, whenever they asked to be sat with. And so several times a day, including my morning sit and my evening sit, because I was like going crazy at that time. Like my morning practice routine became like 2 or 3 hours of stuff, of yoga, meditation, journaling, because I felt like I needed it. I still do. But the focus really was mindfulness of the feelings. Feelings, the second of the 4 establishments of mindfulness. Mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of the feelings, mindfulness of the thoughts, and mindfulness of awareness. And that's, if we were look at mindfulness as a table with 4 legs, those are its 4 legs in a traditional way. And so I just leaned in to the second establishment. And whenever a strong feeling came up, whatever it was, my cushion was right there and I just sat it. Sometimes for just a minute.
Sure.
But what I was trying to do was maintain the attitude that I was not going to ignore, repress, deny, or in any way give my feelings short shrift. I wanted that data. And I wanted to honor them and to care for them with attention, loving intention. And of course, that led to more understanding. Like I learned a lot about myself this year. And why I was so sad, and what it means to me to be connected to my friends, and what the difference is between talking to somebody in person and talking to somebody on the phone or via Zoom. But for me, the focus was the feelings.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I'm sure people listening will find it helpful. Again, I think in my experience, a lot of mindfulness teaching now, kind of popular mindfulness, focuses mostly on awareness of thoughts. I wouldn't say exclusively. And it's good for many people to become more aware of thoughts instead of just having them. But
I don't even know. Is it? It depends on how you're being introduced to those thoughts. Because I see a lot of people meeting mindfulness practice, as you're pointing out, in this style of teaching, and they're being overwhelmed by their thoughts.
Right.
Are they ready to recognize that they're having 60,000 mental events a day?
Yeah.
Some of them are.
Yeah.
And sometimes I wasn't. Like first few years I was practicing on mindfulness of the body almost. I dipped into paying like quiet attention to my thoughts. I would start to freak out.
Yeah, sure.
My thoughts were,
yeah. No, that's right. And if you haven't had the experience yet of learning, non-judgment about the thoughts and non-identifying with the thoughts, then I can see you could go down a bad hole there.
Throwing people in the deep end.
Yeah.
Especially because so many people, and I don't want accuse any mindfulness teacher of ever saying this, but in common parlance, now that the word mindfulness is on the cover of Time magazine, now people start to think they have an idea what it is. Just like 20 years ago, like if you stop somebody on the street and ask them what yoga was, they probably would have said they don't know. Now, no one would say that. They would all have some kind of answer, even if they'd never been in a yoga class. They would start talking. That is becoming true with mindfulness, and that's very dangerous. Stop that 100 people on the street. Over half of them are going to say something about stopping their thinking.
That's right. That's right.
So they're at war with their thoughts.
I hear it a lot.
Whoa, like, I mean, if my cardiologist ever tells me, like, excuse me, Mr. Kenneally, like, can you stop your heart for a moment? I want to do some tests. Right? I'm going to know I'm in the wrong room.
And on the side of feeling, so I just very coincidentally had taken a retreat in person right before everything hit in last February with, I don't know if you know of John McCransky, but no, he's in Massachusetts. But anyway, he's adapted some mindfulness teachings on self-awareness of feelings specifically. It focuses specifically on feelings. It was kind of the right time for me, because like you, I was then able, I mean, it was just a very much beginner at it. But then he did it again online, and I was able to find a Sangha in his school. And that's been a godsend for me, because I wasn't aware of it. And I hadn't been exposed to that focus on awareness of and sitting with feelings really before. And so the fact that it came right before COVID hit was just the right time for me. And it's a little bit different from the way I've been taught before, to kind of, I don't know, let feelings go or let them pass. Maybe better than getting totally wrapped up in them, but not the same as really being fully present with them.
That expression, let go. When that's a very commonly used expression. I want to focus on it. Right? I like the way this conversation is going, because I feel like we're defining a lot of important terms. Right? Like, what is love? What is mindfulness? Letting go. Like, when I first heard people say "let go," like a spiritual teacher or a self-help teacher, say "let go," like, the picture I had, like what I took away from that was a hummingbird, like sitting on my hand, and it flies. And of course, like, that has not been my experience. There's a wonderful Zen teacher at the Deer Park Monastery in Southern California, the tradition of Thich Hanh. His name is Brother Hanh. He's Australian, and he's phenomenal, hilarious teacher. And he talks about letting go like this. He's like, you're holding like this, right? And letting go is just that. Just open your palm. Like, it doesn't go anywhere.
Right.
Trauma, my experience, my life history, even my view isn't gonna just go anywhere. Right. But I can let go of it. Like, I can stop holding on.
That's great.
Right, and just hold it a little bit more lightly, and be like, wow, I'm feeling that really strongly right now. So I agree. Like, that's exactly what the practice of coming home to the body, and their body being the ground out of which the feelings spring. The feelings or the emotions just, being a function of our nervous system largely. Coming home to that and letting go of it, and getting more practice at holding it lightly is game changer. It's game changer. Because the thoughts are still there, right? Oh my God, I don't want to die, the whole thing. And I can say personally, I feel like I touched it on almost every level this year. Like, shifting to the online world, like, put my life under financial strain. My longtime girlfriend and I just coincidentally broke up like a month before COVID happened. So I was, processing all of that.
Yeah,
I'm like kind of sort of extra alone during that time. And I could go on like, we all have this very long list now of the ways that this affected us.
Yeah.
The fact that I had this training and being able to just really look at it every day, like sit down with it and look at it, meaning freaked out Dave.
Yeah.
Freaked out Dave. And hold it a little bit more lightly.
Yeah.
Wow. I don't even like to think about how hard it would have been without it.
I really appreciate you sharing it, because you probably get this. I sometimes have people say to me, "Oh, Robert, you practice mindfulness. You must not get irritated. You must not get angry," or whatever, as if that's the goal or the outcome or something. And I say, no, that's not it. It's not it at all. I like that analogy of the letting go, right? The feelings are still there. They don't stop happening necessarily.
Exactly.
And I would hope people listening, who haven't delved into it, maybe would feel a little bit, maybe it would help with self-judgment to know that if they're sitting with the feelings and they're not feeling them, nothing wrong. Because that message can be spread sometimes, maybe again, unintentionally, that somehow if you're successful at the practice, it means that you won't feel any unpleasant feelings or something like that. I don't know.
Right. And then we see people avoiding the practice because they're imagining that end result. Like I'm sure you've had somebody say to you like, well, I don't want to be a zombie.
Yes.
I don't want to go through life like a Zen robot who doesn't feel or react ever.
Right.
Like a half an hour hanging out with me, and they're like, "Dude, like you've been drinking, like you're kind of intense. Like we thought you were very calm."
Right. People even say for someone to be Zen, it means somehow super calm and even, right?
Right, exactly. I'm very buttoned up. I'm like, yeah, sometimes.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's why, the Zen master Sung Sam, a Korean Zen master, who John Kabat-Zinn and a lot of American Zen masters did some training with back in the day. Like he was famous for, in the middle of like one of these very measured like talks, he would reach down and grab his walking stick and just slam it on the table. And everybody in the room like, ah! He just put it down and go back to talking.
Yeah, it's great.
I'm glad we're talking about this, Robert. I think people do need a reminder that like we're not talking about becoming something other than a normal human being. We're talking about the exact opposite. We're talking about being a real human being, like feeling the full catastrophe.
Right.
John Kabat-Zinn likes to say, like, my good day now is like my day at the end of which that I feel satisfied and content and even happy is a day where I feel everything.
Yeah.
I am not even trying to be in a state of joy or a feeling of calm or contentment all day. The opposite. I'm trying to lean into this roller coaster and enjoy the whole ride. And if at the end of the day, I'm like, talking to my best friend on the phone as I try to do in the evening, I'm like, it was a good day. I cried about this. I laughed hysterically at this moment. I wanted to smash this thing. I had a good day. I was a real human being.
Yeah.
So I see the training as not a dampening,
right,
but instead a strengthening. How can I be strong enough to deal with how intense this is? How intensely beautiful and painful reality is.
Yeah.
Like yoga, right?
Right.
I'm not practicing yoga so that I can block out my experience. Right? I'm like, okay, how can I be so strong here that I can handle this?
Yes.
That I can look at it standing on one foot, balance and breathe.
Yeah.
And smile even a little.
Yeah, that's right. Right. Smile in the face of it.
Yeah.
Well, great. I hope that is some comfort and encouragement to people listening. Where else can people get in touch with you, find out about you, learn from you? Where should people go?
Thanks, Robert. Well,
Yeah.
I made it as simple as possible. I put everything on my website, which is just davekenneally.com.
Yeah. Okay.
And if they go there, they'll find more information about my workshops. I have a weekly Sangha, which in Buddhist parlance means community or family. And in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition, that's how we practice. We get together once a week.
Yeah.
So from noon to 1 Pacific Standard Time, I'm there. And anybody who wants to be can be there with me. It's a donation-based event. And I talk for about a half an hour. And then I take questions and comments for about a half an hour. And so it's a time, once a week where my Sangha or my family of practice can be with their teacher and can ask some questions and love each other as well.
Yeah.
And so we do that every Sunday. And then I also do this one-on-one with people via Zoom.
Great.
Used to do it in person. But now, I've actually been enjoying, just being able to come into people's homes and sit with them for an hour and practice together in the old way, as a one-on-one. Yeah.
That's great. So some bright side of the technology, maybe, despite, I'm sure you'd be looking forward to when you can go back to doing both in person and virtual. For those people who might be able to meet with you in person when the time comes, where are you located geographically?
I live in San Diego.
Okay, great.
I'm a New Yorker, as we were talking about. I've landed here. I don't know. It's like flip-flops over 300 days of the year. I can do that.
Fantastic.
Maybe it makes mindfulness of the body a little bit easier.
Sure.
That's never freezing.
Fantastic. Well, this has been great, Dave. I really, really enjoyed speaking with you from your very unique and I'll say joyful perspective. So thanks so much for being on the Technology for Mindfulness podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome.
Doing this important work.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Be well.
You too.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Technology for Mindfulness podcast with me, Robert Plotkin, and today's guest, Dave Kenneally. You can find out more about Dave at davekenneally.com. That's DaveKenneally.com. If you like today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and review, and share the episode with your friends. And don't forget to also check out our blog at technologyformindfulness.com for information and tips about how to be more focused, productive, creative, and happy using technology. And sign up for our mailing list to receive a free guide on how to find balance and manage your technology use with mindfulness. I'm Robert Plotkin, and I'll join you next time on the Technology for Mindfulness podcast.